Now that we've seen some of the basic and advanced sketch entities, let's start talking about ways that we can dimension those in our sketch environment. First, we want to select the top plane and we want to start a new sketch. And I'm going to start by sketching a circle at the origin. Now, once you place the circle, we're going to hit escape once to get off the circle creation tool and one more time to deselect the circle. Just to the right of exit sketch, you'll notice something that says Smart Dimension. Now, Smart Dimension can create a whole host of different dimensions, but there's a drop down below it that has specific types, for instance, horizontal or vertical dimensions, ordinate dimensions in different directions, or a path length dimension. Now, in this case, for a circle, we're going to select Smart Dimension, select the circle, and we're going to create a diameter value of 125 millimeters. Smart Dimension is a very powerful tool that allows you to create a whole host of different dimensions simply by making your selection. So now let's take a look at creating some dimensions for other types of sketch entity. We're going to create a line that goes from the right quadrant point of the circle, and it's going to go out horizontal to the right. And then we're going to draw a line that goes up and to the right at some angle. We'll double left click the mouse to end the selection tool, hit escape. Now we can apply a few dimensions. Now a few things you'll notice in the sketching environment. When something is fully defined, it will be black. When it's underdefined, it'll be blue. Now these are the default colors for underdefined and fully defined. Let's start by creating a dimension. We're going to go to Smart Dimension, select our horizontal line, and drag this down. We're going to place 100 in the box and hit the Enter key. So now our horizontal line is fully defined. Next, we're going to hit the Escape key, and we're going to use the Smart Dimension dropdown. In this case, I'm going to grab a vertical dimension, select my line, and drag it out to the right. So one thing you'll notice is that this creates a dimension that can only be a vertical dimension. If I move the cursor around, it's not creating any other types of dimensions. Let's hit the Escape key twice, and let's select Smart Dimension this time. Make the same selection process by selecting this line, but now you'll notice that it gives us a different dimension. In this case, 93.73 millimeters. This is an ordinate dimension. If we drag it out to the right, at some point it's going to snap to a vertical dimension. If we drag it up, it's going to snap to a horizontal dimension. This is why the Smart Dimension tool is so powerful, because it allows you to create multiple types of dimensions. One thing you'll also notice is next to the cursor, there's a mouse icon with a blue shaded right mouse button and a lock. Now, if you want to determine that this dimension should only a vertical dimension, but you're having trouble because it's snapping to different types, drag it in an area where it's a vertical dimension, hit the right mouse button, and now we can lock it as a vertical dimension, but move it around the screen wherever we want. If we hit the right mouse button again, it'll unlock it, and it'll go back to a smart dimension that allows you to create multiple types. This functionality is very handy, mostly when you're trying to create an ordinate dimension, because most of the time, you don't want to place it right next to your sketch entity, but as soon as you get it out away from your sketch entity, it starts to snap to a vertical. So once we get close, we'll hit the right mouse button, and then we can drag it out as far as we need to in order to create that dimension. Let's go ahead and create the dimension of 90 millimeters. Now, the reason ordinate dimensions are important is because this line may or may not stay at that angle. If we made this a vertical dimension and we move the endpoint of the line around, it would change the way it's dimensioned. Let's hit the Escape key, right-click on this dimension, and go down to make driven. When you make a dimension driven, you'll notice that it turns gray. Now, as I move the line around, the dimension changes based on what the line length is. So the line dimension is no longer driving the length of the line, but rather it's driven by the length of the line. This gives us a great opportunity to use Smart Dimension again and drag this dimension out to the right to be a vertical dimension. If we make this 80 millimeters, our line is still underdefined. Let's hit Escape to exit the Smart Dimension tool, and let's move the line around. So you notice that we can drag it left and right, and this changes our driven dimension, but our vertical dimension stays at 80. So if you're making a design that requires this line to be a certain length, but might not necessarily stay at that angle, it's important that you understand the difference between a vertical dimension and an ordinate dimension. Let's go ahead and add one more smart dimension. We'll select this line and our horizontal line, and we'll apply an angle, in this case 60 degrees. So you'll notice at 60 degrees, 80 millimeter vertical height gives us a 92.38 millimeter length of our line. So very important difference between those two types. Let's hit Escape to exit the Smart Dimension tool. There are a few other types of dimensions I want to talk about. Let's start by creating a spline, and let's just start by adding a start point and an end point, hitting the Escape key. Next, let's select the Smart Dimension tool and select the spline. You notice that it gives us a length dimension. It says 236.24 millimeters. Now, recently SolidWorks added the ability to determine the length of a spline by adding a dimension. We're not going to do that just yet. So we're going to place this dimension, say OK, we're going to right click on it, and we're going to make driven. Now let's select our spline and activate one of the handles. So you can see that once we activate a handle, this length value changes based on the spline. Now this has great power for things like creating paths for cables. So if you need a very organic cable that routes around some of your parts, you need to create it manually without the cable routing functionality, you can determine how long that cable needs to be. This can help you create certain length cables that fit inside your design. Now that we've created a driven length value, let's go ahead and add a few more dimensions. Again, I'm going to use Smart Dimension, and this time I'm going to select the handle. The value that's on the screen is going to be the weight of the handle. If we make it 500, you'll notice that the length of that handle changes. You'll also notice that the arrow at the end of that handle is now black because it's fully defined. We can select the line and select our horizontal line, and we can place an angle dimension between this handle. In this case, let's say 50 degrees. Now you can see the handle is fully defined, but the spline is still underdefined. That's because its endpoints are still free to move around, and we don't have any dimension for the other handle. All right, let's take a look at a few more things. Let's create a straight slot, and let's go ahead and take a look at these dimensions. Now when we have a slot, we can dimension its center to center value or its overall value. Let's go ahead and say this is 350 by 100. Now you'll notice it's still underdefined because it's not fixed in space, it's free to float around. We also need to give it a few more dimensions. I'm going to go ahead and drag this down to my origin, and once I do, you notice that now it's fixed in space because it's using a relation to lock it to my origin. So different ways that we can use these dimensions to define things like splines. Now let's take a look at one last example. Let's go ahead and create a 3-point arc. Start endpoint and its radius value. Now when we want to dimension an arc, let's go ahead and use the Smart Dimension tool, and let's simply select the arc. Now this gives us a radius value. Go ahead and place a radius value on this. If I select the endpoints of my arc, it gives me a distance between those, and because I'm using the Smart tool, I can make it a vertical, horizontal, or an ordinate dimension. If I make a third selection by selecting the arc, I can actually determine the length of the arc itself. In this case, let's say 600. And you can see that shortened up the arc, and we're now controlling the length of the arc completely. This is a great way that you can do things like define your arcs, define your splines, or define your slots. There are many other different ways that you can use dimensions. The Smart Dimensions dropdown has a path length dimension, and this can be very helpful when you're creating paths for things like cam followers, or if you have specific slots that you've created inside of your parts and you need to determine their lengths. We're not going to talk about that because it's a little bit more of an advanced technique, but just note that there are other options than we've covered here. Let's go ahead and escape out of the Smart tool, select all our entities, and hit delete. In the top right-hand corner, I'm going to use the red X and discard changes and exit my sketch.